Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Maybe good afternoon, maybe good evening. Let's take a moment to ground in and just invite your body to receive learning. Learning doesn't just happen through the mind, rather, learning happens through all of our five senses that we've been practicing opening. So we learn through taste, smell, hearing, sound, touch. And when we intake not just through our cognitive psyche, but we intake learning through our body. So as we traverse today on the topic of group counseling and look at both strategies and skills for your journey, it's going to take an all hands in approach. And as a reminder, I invite you with this material to step in or to lean back. I invite you to offer up contrast, critique, as well as things that resonate, things that you vibrate in similarity with. So let's jump in. I will be your guide, Dr. D, pronouns they, them, and I was asked to talk a little bit more about my background. Happy to do that. So I graduated from a master's in counseling in 2014. And during that time, I was a student who had studied art in my undergraduate degree, dance, as well as psychology. So I was someone that had been using movement, play, flamenco, belly dance as ways to move through my own physical healing journey. I had also been using art. I would do a lot of oil mediums, really big installations. One of my favorite paintings I ever did that I got a scholarship for was a door that you could actually walk into. So you could walk into the painting and interact it and pull open all these little doors. And the last door that you could pull open in the painting itself just had a mirror. So it was this journey of introspection. The field of counseling, in my early perspectives, was that it was very psychological and it was very dominant from the head up. There was a lot of verbalizing how we felt and words. However, over the journey of the last 10 years, my practice has become very somatically oriented, very much ancestrally oriented. And really, when I work, I'm inviting myself as well as the clients we serve to be in full body awareness with each other. So my master's is in counseling. And then I decided that it wasn't enough to just talk about what was happening in the world, let alone talk about it just in English. So I decided that I would go back to school and focus on a doctoral study that would allow me to critique the field of mental health from being outside of it. And I was able to write my dissertation in a language that wasn't English, and I was able to have a full diversity panel of counsel, of support from mentors. So my dissertation chair was just instrumental in bridging multicultural gaps that I saw in the profession, indigenous ways of being in the counseling profession, and use them through psychoeducation. So for my doctoral work, I actually ran groups of narrative therapy and how through art and juxtaposing our own issues with help from counsel, from nature, from birds, from kin, from plant kin, how can we run groups where parents don't need a psychologist or a therapist to jump into some of these world issues that we face, world issues like borders and boundaries, who has health insurance, who doesn't, what language or native tongue has more power, like English versus other languages that are becoming extinct. Up to 40% of languages worldwide are almost extinct. So writing a dissertation in Spanish, being able to bring in different cultural perspectives was really critical for me. So my dissertation and my doctoral studies were specifically looking at what is mental health in cultures outside of the United States. And how do Latino populations who don't have paper or immigration status, how do they go about healing outside of a system of traditional mental health where they don't even have access to those points because they don't have insurance or documents? And so what we found was communities have absolute abundance of wisdom and they don't even need therapists. Rather, they just need resources and tools to help plug them in. And after that experience, I worked for a little bit doing public health policy and using my counseling skills more related to research in diverse communities. So I worked with Zuni Pueblo, one of the 33 major tribes in New Mexico, looking at how do we bring educators more resources through the lens of counseling and health to those communities. Still unsatisfied, still hungry in my own self, figuring out, well, how do I blend these systems together that are more somatically oriented in the field of therapy? And that took me to going back to school and really digging into what are the biological functions of emotions. I've heard very much in the field of therapy, what is the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, that is so associated with trauma responses? And well, frankly, I wanted to know what the other 12 cranial nerves were. We have the vagus nerve, but we also have the olfactory nerve, how we smell. We have the optic nerve, how we see, the hypoglossal nerve of taste. And so I jumped full in. So over the last 10, 11 years of being a therapist, I worked in different clinical settings. First, worked in an attachment healing center, helping people with often adopted backgrounds or individuals who were immigrating and were refugees coming to the United States for the first time, helping them land and orient in family and kinship context was a big piece. So in that work, I used a lot of neuroscience as well as family systems and ancestral family systems to work with these clients. I also worked as an elementary school counselor, and those experiences with family and children bring forth a lot of play and somatic necessity because the little kid doesn't want to talk about it and they don't even have the cognitive schema or frames to talk about it. They need to move it out. They need to play, and through play we create alchemical processes. So when I say alchemical, that refers to Jungian theories about how we look at turning silver to gold, precious metal to gold. And we can do that with our emotions and our human bodies. And we can also do that with the pursuit of metal and gold. So we alchemize and we become alchemical when we do this work. Some other important things to know about my own culture, my own background, is that I'm someone who gets migraines often. And when I get them for a period of like a week or a few days before or after, I'll have synesthesia, meaning I hear and feel words. I can feel words. I can smell words and they move. So things that have color or sound are very sensitive to me. So you'll often find I enjoy reframing words like counseling with an S to counseling with the C. And so that's just part of me sharing my own culture as a guide, as a facilitator for the work. So I hope that introduction, a little bit of both my clinical background in psychology, my background in Chinese medicine, all really important context of how I'm seeing the profession and how I'll be your guide for your road ahead in your profession. Even have the little plant here as our guide as well. Let's jump in. So today we're gonna touch on chapters 1, 3, and 5 in the ninth edition of our book, which is, I'm going to hold up, Joop. We got Group Counseling, Strategies, Skills, written by Ed Jacobs, Christine Schimmel, Bob Mason, and Riley. So this is what it looks like. If you have other editions, no problem, but you'll just need to figure out and negotiate the chapter readings. Fun numerology, go ahead and check that out. 5, all the elements. 3 is the symbol of fire. 1, often the number associated with water or the circle. 3, the triangle. 5, the pentagram. So here are some learning outcomes. So outcomes growth, outcomes harvest. Let's look at a little snippet of what we're going to talk about today. So we have the group container, how we open, how we close, how we contract, expand. And I want to bring your attention to some somatic and verbal consent. They're different. As well as discuss you getting really comfortable in your own theoretical orientation as a therapist, because that gives you the tools you need to work with a group. So if you're going to do internal family systems and you'd like to apply that to a group setting, well, then you'll want to sit yourself in that theory and see how it can apply based on the principles you'll get in this class of group counseling. Some of my theoretical orientations that you'll get to experience through me in this class are going to be de-colonial therapy, so healing modalities that existed even before the profession of counseling that have ample theoretical and research-driven outcomes from parallel fields of psychology, anthropology, social studies, and that really falls under multiculturalism within our field. I also employ transpersonal and somatic work. We'll talk today about counselor resourcing with one's counsel, as well as self-care and compassion. And then we'll jump a little bit into the shadow of these different stages of group, as well as issues that may cause isolation, both in self or the group. All right, so let's jump in. Group therapy as a container and as a spiral. You'll see that my video is going to go to the background and I will allow my voice to come to the foreground. So group container as therapy. So I want you to just take a moment. I highly encourage folks to enjoy your videos as a podcast. So you could totally be like making some eggs, making a yummy omelet with fresh ham and cheese, maybe cojita, or maybe some chives on top, whatever you enjoy. Or maybe you're a learner that likes to really sit down and take it in. But even if you are listening kind of podcast style, go ahead and take in this image of a grouped container with all these spirals, because this is how it often works. Our healing is very holographic in nature and will often repeat a pattern that maybe we thought we healed or worked through. It will show up in group, and so group becomes this perfect engagement of our own self-study. This being that becomes comes from the arising of this and that arising. This being that becomes not from the ceasing of this and the ceasing of that. That comes from the Wheel of Dharma by Nikaya, a Muslim poet. The being that becomes from the arising of this and that is not being that becomes not. It is the ceasing of this that ceases. So it's very circular logic that we're going to be working with in group. I hope it challenges you. I hope it confuses you, because truth just sits right in that contradiction. So some reasons that the book talks about for leading groups are the following here. It gives us feedback loops. We often learn vicariously through others, so we learn through nonverbal role modeling. And it also gives us real life approximation or practice. So, for example, let's say that you want to ask someone out on a date, but you get a little bit nervous or you get butterflies in your stomach, asking someone in the group maybe what they like to do for fun, or asking someone in the group how they like to spend a Saturday morning gives you practice so that you can take that in the real world and apply it. It also gives us the opportunity to commit to something. Often groups run in 4 to 8 sessions with 8 to 12 people. And so you have to commit to show up to those 4 groups in order to see harvest come from what you're putting in. Another aspect of group I enjoy is it gives us a variety of perspective and viewpoints that contrast our worldview, as well as gives us an experience of where we are the same, where we're common, where we have kinship and just shared human experiences. Also, it creates a sense of belonging if the group is done well, and if that is built in, that there is space for all of your weirdness, all of who you are to fully show up without judgment and just kind of be held in compassion. So I also want to give a shout out to the publisher, 2016. So you can see on the right hand corner, I took some of these reasons for groups directly from the textbook. So in chapter 1, you're also looking at what are the reasons for leading groups. That fits into this slide a little bit, but also what are the different types of groups that you might be interested in leading. And then what are the characteristics that actually make a good leader? And I would argue it's the majority of resonance and coherence in your own field. So anything that you haven't healed in you that still feels like an open wound, those will often be the challenges that will come up for you as a facilitator of a group. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but I'd like to plug that seed with you. Was there anything challenging or surprising that came up in our group on suffering that you didn't expect, like a role you played, or a need you got met or didn't get met? Because that's our own projection into the cosmos of the circle. Other kinds of groups that can be useful might be education, more of a discussion-based task. However, I find that within the field of therapy or at your internship sites, most of the groups that you'll run are going to be psychoeducation based and more in alignment with the traditional counseling therapy groups on topics such as groups for addiction or groups for grief and loss, groups for divorce. These are some of the most common agency groups that I've seen. But know that you can still get really transpersonal and creative in how you're offering some of these somatic groups. So go ahead and just take a moment, and you already jotted down some groups you're interested in, but I want you to think about what population of people on the planet right now are you interested in working with, because that will also determine and steer what type of group. So if you're working with children age 6 to 8 or 10, how you theoretically set up your group is going to be different than maybe working with elders in a nursing home who experience grief and loss. So the population really intersects, informs the theory as well as the type of group you elect. As we know, this is a different advantage for group versus individual, and group isn't for everyone. Sometimes there are wounds for a person that are just too active that they're not able to sit in a group. I shared during our inventive time together that I've had to set limits and let people know, actually your anger is so big right now that it's not appropriate to bring you into a group, because that will monopolize the entire feeling and sensation of the group. So part of that is your ability to set a limit in yourself and with the other as to who can arrive and who isn't appropriate for arrival. So different types of theory. I created an entire additional video on transpersonal psychology where I blend the scientific backing based on neurological studies, based on statistical analysis of transpersonal methods. And one of my favorite is the Maharaji effect. And what they found was if they took a group of meditators, 100, 200 people, and asked them to meditate in the middle of a city, how would that change rates of crime and violence during the time that people were meditating? And what they found is group meditation has the capacity to change and alter crime rates in a given area, like a city. There are great portals of connection that can take place between consciousness and modern science. And so if you're interested in more transpersonal videos about these sorts of topics and the ways in which sound actually becomes its own permeable holographic healing when we're introduced to sound, then I'll invite you to look at that video. It's under optional videos for this given module that you can do a deeper dive into. And if you're somebody that is interested in more just like, how do I email people to form a group, or how do I do selection protocols for a group, this is going to have a little bit more of the bare bone structure. But know that throughout this class and our time together, I'm going to give you a buffet. And it's your job on the buffet to, one, not eat too much and get a bellyache. But it's also, when you eat a buffet, it's like, what foods resonate with me that I need to eat and consume based on where I'm at in this given moment of time. So I'll offer you dessert, cheesecake, I'll offer you apple pie, all of it homemade fresh, and sometimes I'll just offer you basic meat and potatoes, the basic building blocks of the profession, and you get to decide what you are going to intake. So more, if you'd like, in optional videos. Some of the common videos you'll see is really coming from individual theory. So we can look at behavioral reality therapy that is used, or solutions-focused therapy, and that's used in school settings pretty frequently. And when we look at solution-focused therapy, often you only get with a kiddo or a family or even a group 8 sessions tops. And one of the questions that we ask the group is called the miracle question. And that's, if you had a magic wand, what would you change? So it helps us investigate what limiting beliefs is someone seeped in that is controlling their reality, when actually a reframe could open up all of this different energy and potential for resolution. So solution-focused therapy is a really nice theoretical way to also lead a group, because it deals with these what-if questions, or if you had the magic wand. And so often with the magic wand exercise, kids come up with these brilliant solutions to the issues that they're facing in their school or their community or their life. One solution-focused group I ran was only 3 sessions, because we often, in school counseling or even in agency work, we exist in the confines of the system, and so we have to get creative. So we only had 3 sessions with elementary schoolers, and mostly 3rd and 4th graders were in the group. And it was a community that dealt with a lot of issues to access to food. And in the miracle question, or the wand question of, imagine that this wand could fix or change anything, the kids came up with the idea for a community garden that was eventually funded. So there's this beautiful intersect of giving the power back to the group through these different theoretical orientations. So this is a place where it's going to be really exciting and helpful to pull in old textbook from a theory class, from a human growth and development class, and think about how can you even become eclectic and pull tools from these different theories. So other theories might be rational emotive behavioral therapy, or cognitive-based therapy, which actually has a ton of roots in mindfulness and acceptance therapy, where we talked about pain of like, I can have a fit about it, or I can just sit with it and sit in it. And so we can use these inspirations from our theories and weave them into our groups. So some groups might be discussion based. When I worked as an attachment therapist, we did a lot of psychoeducation groups on just basic neuroscience with parents and how mirror neurons shape the experience of how adoptive or new children to a family unit are received. For example, if you're not in coherence neurologically or in a restful state, even if you say you belong or you're welcome in our new family, the words don't matter if you're not in resonance. So that's a lot of the psychoeducation for neuroscience. And some of the psychoeducation groups or just discussion-based groups don't need counseling theory, but I find it informing and fun to bring it all in. So our approaches to group therapy and the impact is just going to be noticing when you're clear and concise about the experience. If the group is feeling boring, that's a feedback loop for you. And also really noticing that people won't mind if you lead or you guide them if you're doing it well. Ultimately, it's not your responsibility as the therapist to drive the outcome. And for some of us, it's like, are you sure? Yes, I'm definitely sure. The group has its own intelligence, and part of your job is to step back, step away, and allow the group to work with its own intelligent system. So when I was first starting to lead groups, I also did a lot of teaching yoga as part of leading a group. And when I got feedback from this incredible supervisor, she shared with me, Anna, your groups are amazing. However, you're teaching or you're leading to the bottom 50% of consciousness in the class. Teach to the top 25% of consciousness, awareness, somatic capacity in the class. And that shifted so much, even how I led groups, was instead of waiting for the last person who maybe couldn't get their right foot in front of their left because they didn't have that sensory connection and feeling held up by the lower strata of the group of awareness, actually teach to the person who's going for a handstand, teach to the person who's jumping for enlightenment. So teach and hold the upper 25 sphere of consciousness. And that was really fun for me to play with as a group leader. Of, am I getting caught up in the smaller systems where people are still figuring out somatic embodiment of right or left? Or am I teaching to more advanced learners who are ready for more? So something for you to play with in your own groups that you'll be running as well. What strata are you teaching to? So let's talk about counselor resourcing. I'm so glad this came up. So resource. What is source? Source is the abundance, the creator, the life force of all that is. And we get to tap into that. And so resourcing or going to source is going to look very different for each one of us. Let's take a few breaths to acknowledge and name what source feels like for us. So for me, the resource is taking time to create within me an inner garden that is sacred temple. And in that inner garden of sacred temple, there may be beautiful green trees, wet rainforest. There may be puma or jaguar at my service. So it's getting colorful, imaginative in our own bodies so that whenever we need, we can just take a vacation and hang out, lay on the beach within ourselves. It really helps to have some of that physically around you, such as rooting your bare feet in the earth, pre and post leading a group, or taking a moment to Visualize your consciousness in the sun and the sun's consciousness in you, and just feeling all of the electromagnetic exchange that happens when our body is exposed to sunlight. So often, these resourcing moments therapeutically for the facilitator of a group, they're small, but they take time to cultivate. So, here is an offering, here's an invitation for homework, spelled WERK, like we're working it, if you like, is going to be to take time and resource yourself before and after you listen to some of your lectures or you read a book. What can you let fall away that was on the buffet you didn't really care for? And what was on the buffet of learning that you are deeply integrating now? This is all part of our therapeutic resourcing, but let's unpack this a bit more. Part of your own resource is knowing how directive and structured you are as a person. So this is all self-study. Are you primarily made up of water where you just allow the group to flow? Or do you have tendencies of metal where there's structure, there's a really hard end and start time? You're really tracking, did that individual and group take up 5 minutes and some people didn't talk at all? How does that land or sit with you? All of this is part of our own elemental awareness. And so what we find is that active styles work better for smaller groups. However, I would add to this that you living in your vibrational dharma or your life purpose or your natural tendencies is what is going to make you the most efficient leader style. And then you can call and create groups that honor your natural tendencies. I will be putting some assessments on our course page so that you can engage with this self-study. If you're someone that hasn't yet looked at your own gene keys, I highly suggest that. It's a fusion created by Richard Rudd that looks at the I Ching, which has 2,000 years of history and relevance related to 64 hexagrams of the DNA, as well as bringing in aspects from the Vedic astrology from India. And it puts these two assessments together that are really useful for you in things like career counseling and really useful in what type of groups you might be leading. So, self-study is the most integral piece of your own leadership style. In the textbook, you'll also get to read more about leader-directed versus group-directed. And what we did in our intensive, playful inventing with each other was slightly more leader-directed than I might normally do because it was an online space, because it's new. And if you also notice, we practice pieces of consent along the way. So breathing in fully to your body to see if that's a yes or no, that's a somatic consent. That's different than verbal. People will give you verbal consents all the time, like, yeah, I would like to do that. And then if you're tracking their body behavior, you can sometimes notice patterns of freezing or holding. So it becomes really key, really integral to ask for somatic consent as well as verbal consent. Somatic consent also includes allowing someone to implore hand gestures or body gestures of physically stepping into the space or physically stepping out of the space. So these are all aspects of if you're more leader directed or group directed. Even if you're more group directed, you're still going to want to hold a really firm base for people of verbal and nonverbal consent, as well as setting the container. I like to use ritual, as you saw. That's something from my own multicultural background. But it's really important that if you are interested in other indigenous ways of being, and that's not your culture, how you hold and work with that is going to be that you start to get to know your ancestors, because every single culture around the world absolutely has indigenous ways of being And how do we define indigeneity? Indigeneity is really a group of people forming bonds with a given land consciousness and enacting as protectors and guardians of Earth, of that Earth land. And so things like colonization really disrupt that homeland connection that groups of people have had to a given place, creating diaspora, like just creating dissonance from where we are from, dissonance from the land that knows us. So these are some of the hallmarks of legacy wounds that we have to deal with. So if, let's say, you're somebody who isn't of an Indigenous background, it's getting in touch perhaps with your own Celtic roots or your own Germanic roots. And within Celtic mythology or even Greek mythology, there is so much vibrant ritual that we have access to based on our own genetic makeup in our body, in our blood. And especially when we're people of mixed race or mixed descent, it becomes this really creative fusion of reclaiming that was lost. So it gets really exciting to ask self this question: what is my own ancestral indigeneity? And what is that land? And so cultivating, calling in, relationizing with the land where your ancestors are from is how you decide how group directed to be, how ceremonial to be, or how leader directed you decide to be. So again, this all comes back to your own self-study of you leading an effective group. Multicultural counselings, we're already getting into this a little bit, but we can role model for our client breaching multicultural issues by just naming our own struggles and contradictions that we have, that we all carry as group leaders, so that we're now moving into this very colorful expression of who we are without needing to say, oh, I'm all red, I'm all yellow, I'm completely black, I'm completely white, when actually, as a human family, as a human genome, we're pretty diverse with each other. So sharing things from your own cultural background, like I role modeled in our group of like, hey, I'm someone with mixed racial identity. Hey, I'm someone who speaks different languages. How might that impact or shape the group I lead? How might your own gender be both a blind spot and a gift for the groups that you are going to lead? When we look at female specific groups, there's so much shame that can come from topics of menstruation. There's so much shame that can come from topics of birthing. And in these types of groups, it becomes a safe haven for people in bodies with a uterus to share those lived experiences of having a uterus. What is it like when a uterus falls out of your body and you didn't expect it? That's a very common experience post pelvic care, postpartum experiences. Your uterus can fall out, and people don't often in our society talk about that. Or we don't talk about commonly, what is it like the first time you realize that you menstruate and you bleed everywhere? How scary is that? What is the feeling like in the body? So the gender experiences do become a way for us to see our similarity and our difference, and whatever lived experience you carry in your system, in your living body, actually become the gifts that you vibrate with. So whether you're entering this with a lot of wisdom, maybe you're taking this class at age 72, or you're kind of like fresh out of, college or undergrad, and you're like, yeah, I'm learning about all of this. This all plays into how we're able to hold a group for another. And what I find is that people get really stuck on gender. And so many individuals I meet, as someone who identifies as queer, as non-binary, as two-spirited, I really am gender fluid in my experience of myself, much like this colorful image we're looking at together, paint splattered everywhere. When I go to receive medical care treatment, there's so much dominant shared reality that gets projected of female, of feminine, of certain experiences I might have. And so even though I can see like a rainbow flag on an office door, is it really gender affirming if everything that the medical office offers me is actually a projection of womanhood when I don't actually relate or understand all of those experiences? Sexual orientation, right? This is another piece. So, how we work with this in a group settling or context is vulnerability. Start with your own shares about how things hit you, because that can often open up the field for others. Also, let's talk about contradiction within the group. Let's also talk about our own group woundings by these shared societal constructs we have. Race is a construct, it's not real. On one hand, correct, we have racialized what is just a normal diversity of skin color, of different levels of melatonin. And because of that shared racialization to a concept, it became real. And then rights became severed. Freedom, liberation became severed based on a projection of color. So we have to contend with contradiction in our groups and messiness, all aspects of what it means to hold vibrationally a group. So that's where it gets us to Tonglen, one of my favorite practices. Here is a dancer from Cuba. I spent some time in Cuba last spring, and while I was there, I found the practice of Tonglen, which is a Tibetan Buddhist practice. It translates to giving and receiving love. But I found that many of the dancers there, when they would dance, would actually be in this state of Tonglen. And so while I watched them move, I was so transformed by their movement. And I realized, what is this word? What is this concept that is the closest observation I can get to? And it was Tonglen. It was giving and receiving love, compassion. And so how the dancers would start in some of these cultural dances would be to mimic the waves of the ocean that were nearby. And then they would, with their hand gestures, pull these waters, these sacred waters of the ocean onto them as this act of self-love. So when we feel triggered in group, both as leader or participant, we go back to self-compassion. And for many cultures around the world, that compassion may be verbal, but it may not be. So a verbal expression of Tonglen is just sitting and receiving love. Love for those parts of you that are a little confused why racism exists, right? Love for the parts of you that realize that genocide took place. Innocent people were lost because of these human constructs that were created. And so we just send love to those parts, very much like the dancers just calling in these sacred Caribbean waters to themselves. And then in the next part of the dance, they would send it outward. They would begin to dance with the other. So Tonglen is a practice I'm going to encourage us to employ as a group and individually as we move throughout learning the bare bone kind of structures of a group for counseling that gives us kind of the wood that we're using to scaffold a house or to scaffold a building in the new world, but will make your groups radiant, living, live, is that you're aware of the own compassionate cosmic heart that you bring to the group that is supported through the practice of Tonglen. Other aspects of how we run groups is noticing interpersonal values versus intrapersonal values. So again, you can kind of fill this out a little bit of like in yourself, in our group that we did you focus more on the experience of the group process or focus more on personal issues? Just notice. And here there is not a right or wrong. I don't actually see right or wrongs in very many places, but especially not here. Did you notice your role in the group? Were you someone who redirected when you noticed other people didn't get to speak? In the group, I noticed someone was cut off midsection by a distraction of a video not working. And what did that feel like in your nervous system as an observer of the group? Did you want to rescue? Did you just observe? And so when we're in group, we can look with these two bifocal glasses. Actually, we can look with like 10 more, but let's start with bifocal glasses. So focusing on the group dynamic or focusing on the own personal issue you brought. All really beautiful things to notice of how you work and run groups. Also, you can focus more on content or process. So in a somatic group where perhaps I'm gonna do 30 minutes of mindful movement through yoga or Tai Chi, I'm not concerned with content, I'm concerned with embodiment and allowing folks to just gently enter their form. That's very different than if I'm giving a psychoeducation talk on healthy parenting strategies for new parents who are just adopting. So you can see that we're just going in and out of mind and body for different types of leadership function. So according to the book, some things that make an effective leader are going to be your experience working and comfort with a group, planning organizational skills, relevance of topics, and of course, an understanding of basic human issues and conflict. But I put some dried pasta all here just to say, this is going to be dry until you start to cook it and actually practice a group. That's when it becomes a living body versus something just dehydrated that you're reading in a textbook or listening to in a PowerPoint. So think about it as pasta. Your book is giving you pasta, and when we meet in our groups on June 1st and June 29th, that is when you get to cook your pasta and put it to form and practice. Let's just take a few breaths, a little pause in our recording, and we'll come back in a few moments. So feel free to just pause this or feel free to stretch, stand up, walk, move around. Okay, welcome back. So for this next part, I'm going to invite you to go back to being that fish. Yeah, you get to swim around. Go ahead and just close your eyes. You can be a fish on the floor. You can be a fish on your couch. You can be a fish dancing in your kitchen. Notice how a school of fish has this innate knowing of how to move with the group. You're not actively trying to lead anyone or anything, but it happens, it emerges from presence. Yeah, just take a fuller breath out, just allowing your body to wiggle. Yeah, letting your body get weird, get curious. Allow yourself to surprise self. And now I want you to bring your consciousness and your awareness to the feeling of water, knowing that so much of what the school of fish in this ocean is navigating is actually not personal. It can be, but it's simultaneously trans-personal. As you are connected, you're interconnected to all of the other school of fish as if you're one moving, vibrating being body. And so if the water you swim in, aka society, is not well, then no one is well. And this is the zenith of liberation. I personally, as a fish, cannot become free in clear water unless every other fish in my school also has clean water. So ultimately, with groups, this is what we're working towards, is collective freedom, collective liberation. This requires that you resource. Resourcing means that you are connected to the source that makes you feel invincible, big, whole, complete. It also is the reminder that at times what we carry isn't ours. It just belongs in the electromagnetic soup that we call society. So it's our ability to step in the water and to step out of the water. This is counseling resourcing. You having ample amounts of self-study so that you can step in with full capacity when needed. When you're ready, go ahead and transition out. You feeling resourced is what allows you to have a good ethical head on your shoulders. So I'm going to have you pause, and I want you to Google ethical code and state laws counselor. And as you're Googling that, I almost said Guggenheim. As you're Guggenheiming that, as you're in Guggenheim, I invite you to just skim through some of these APA Code of Ethics. They're actually really beautiful. And if I were a student learning these things, I'd actually put these up on my mirror. Like, what am I growing into? What do I want to become? And this is the first one that you can read in our ACA Code of Ethics. You can also download the PDF of this. Highly suggest you keep that on your desktop. So as you're running groups, you're also thinking about these different components. But principle one is non-maleficence, right? So walking in the world, not harming things, people, places. So it's the next time you want to swat a fly, it's like, oh man, I'm actually practicing non-maleficence for my ethical code as a healer, as a therapist, as an activator of consciousness. I'm gonna not slap down the fly or a spider. Oh my gosh, you guys, the spider. I was taking a shower this week. Some of you guys are like, great, I'm so glad my educator showers. I was taking a shower, and this huge spider, maybe like the size of my palm, bigger than that. It was big, and it was clear and slightly yellow. It just fell down from the shower ceiling. And of course, naturally, I jumped back. I gently stepped out of the shower, and I could feel my heart rate just was going really fast. And I could even feel just like a little sweat on my palms. Like, I'm scared of you. I'm scared of you, spider. And then I took a breath and it calmed down, and I just watched the spider. And I realized every time she'd pop up to the ceiling, she'd fall down. And I go, oh no, she's gonna fall. And then she'd pop up to the ceiling again, and then she'd fall down halfway. And each time she fell down, I like kind of became concerned for her. Like, are you okay? Are you gonna hit your head? And each time she fell, she would push out a whole other spindle that I could barely see of light, of this really gentle web. And I realized that each time she was falling and losing her gravity, losing her ground, making mistakes, accidentally deleting a file, that it didn't matter, because just like we can push up a rock up a hill and then it falls back down and we think we've lost everything for our effort, or we didn't bloom, actually in the background, she was building this beautiful web that every time something shattered or broke or fell, it off-put more spokes to an interconnected system that I didn't even see. And I was like, thank you. Thank you so much, spider medicine. How could I kill you, right? How could I create harm to a living system, a living kin, because of my own fear? When actually it was this beautiful blessing of her letting me know, like, hey, it's okay when you work on a book chapter for a day and it gets deleted. It's okay when you feel like you're pushing a rock up this really steep mountainside of life and it tumbles down again. It's okay. There's a bigger network that you're building that you may not see. So, can you live your life as a therapist in non harm? Fidelity. Ooh, fidelity is a big one, and responsibility. So, fidelity, I've committed to teach a 13-week class on what it means to run a group. And I am in fidelity that I will teach you through the textbook and the videos, the bare bones, the structural components of group counseling, so that you can pass your test, you can get a license. And the fidelity is that I'll give you offerings on the buffet table of transpersonal practices and things to play with alongside of that. But I have to do both. And there's a natural inborn tension and contradiction to the field of counseling. It's very young, comparatively speaking. Taoism, 5,000 years old, can tell you all you need to know about healing. Nature is self, you are nature. And counseling, if we look at its origin, gosh, like 1940s was a response to World War I, where they wanted to do a psychological assessments to see where to place people in the war that would be the best fit. Are you better as a factory worker? Are you better as a medic? Are you better on the front lines? That's how the field of counseling came about was a response to war. Fascinating stuff. So fidelity, responsibility to holding a world that's really young and a world that's ancient. It's holding contradictions in the field. That's what makes you excellent and ethical. Integrity. Integrity means that I let my body lead. If I have to use the restroom, then I take a pause and I go urinate and I come back. If I feel like I need to cry because the group is sad, then I cry. We show up with integrity. And also the integrity piece of this is that as a therapist, we don't want to share things that maybe are too fresh for us. If I'm going to give a vulnerable share, it means that I have well processed it. It's something that's buried that's now blooming the flower, right? We don't have to bring the things that are maybe really rough and open and gashing as the leader. Participant, whole different story. You get to bring it all. So as if you're reading the ethical code along with me, we said non-maleficence, fidelity and responsibility, meaning if you said you're going to show up and read the chapters to this class and listen to the boring videos and the exciting videos, that's part of our code of ethics, our code of armor. I'm responsible, I'm trustworthy, and I have integrity. And then this one is really like getting into the juiciness of it for me, of being a therapist, is justice. Yup, social justice, equity in our world, animal rights, human rights, water rights, all of this fits and feeds into the work we do. So please take a look at autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, fidelity as a backbone to who you're becoming, as a backbone to not just you as therapist, but you as human. This is cool stuff. In our culture, we don't often get a lot of guidance on what is virtue. We have to seek and tease that out ourselves. Start to play with virtue here. So one of the ways we're playing with virtue is having adequate supervision. This is your counsel, both spiritually and in the 3D, like you'll have a supervisor, as well as being mindful of dual relationships, because that can put stress and tension on another individual that may be unconscious that you're not thinking of. What is it like to know all of someone's deep secrets and then also have to go to work with them and figure out that really gray line of like, I know that your cat died yesterday and the week before your dad died, and that's why you're falling asleep right now in our work meeting, but I can't actually tell anyone about that. So it gets these gray areas when we're in dual relationships. They're not necessarily bad, but it just takes a lot more work on your part to sift through all of that. So take a moment and also read through Dual Relationships Code of Ethics, because that can come up a lot with group and will be some of the tricky areas. Go ahead and take a moment and just read through some of these other ethical considerations. So some of these are going to be found on page 6, A9, group work. Let's just take a look through that since you have your code of ethics up already. You can see A9A, screening, is a really important thing that can impede the group process. If someone is coming in yelling, cursing, really upset and unaware of that behavior, they might scare other people, and then you're not going to be productive in getting the group flowing. Another really practical thing in group settings is that you're making sure to protect people through consent. So that's where we talked about the somatic consent of breath, physically stepping in as another tool, and hand gestures of, yes, I'm consenting to all these different potentials that can happen in a group. So that's the consent piece. And also noticing that we might have trauma. So have you adequately resourced people in the group so when trauma comes up, we can hold it? So an example that happened was someone in the group shared a really personal, vulnerable, valor experience of their life. And then we were all able to send through our somatic rock, our grounding, our ground in, our current, some love to that person, even though we couldn't physically be there. So we want to think about what type of trauma techniques and webs might we catch people in if they kind of fall out of the group circle. So here are some things that come from the ethical code on page 6 that you can read more about. Appropriate referrals, don't demand participation, that's silly. Let people know about the expectation and the purpose of the group. And then the one down at the bottom, I just put ew by, because it's don't trick people into opening up. That's gross, right? And it's not ethical. And a question, if you've ever been in that experience of tricking someone to open up, why are you doing that as the group leader? That's a bizarre behavior to engage in. What in you needs to force someone else to open? And when we look at trauma sensitive work, that is a really important hallmark of, if you're dealing with someone who has just received sexual abuse, there are times for open-ended questions and time for close-ended questions. Like, are you actively physically safe from the perpetrator? That's a yes or no. You're going to want to get really metallic on how you ask that to be ethical. Do you need a rape kit? Do you need a referral to the doctor's office? Those are very direct questions. And then, of course, when we're being trauma sensitive, even in a group setting, it's, you don't have to share anything you don't want to. You don't have to participate in any way that doesn't feel appropriate. So it's letting the flower know of the soul, you can bloom and start to open when you feel safe. No one's gonna push or force. That is really critical for being trauma informed, is you let the group lead, you let the person lead on how deep they're going. And this might also mean cutting a member off of, like, you're going to get into really vivid details that other people don't need to know. So you might also protect them sometimes by stopping or interjecting of, and the sexual assault went down like this. And then that's where you're going to say, pause. I really value that information. I'm wondering if you could write it down, and then me and you can process that separately. Or, so there also is these different sensitivities you work with when we're being ethical. All right, so thus far we've talked about containers and groups and resourcing, which involves your own self-study and you feeling like you have the armor or the backbone of your ethics when you go into groups. So print out your ethics, write them on your mirror, and let's start to practice them. In Tibet in the spring, there are some monasteries where the monks will not leave the satsang or the group or the Nalanda. They will not leave the Nalanda because they don't want to step on a fly. Like that's how in non-maleficence they are. How beautiful is that? Integrity. Can you start practicing that in your life, not just with your counseling people or your group people that you're leading? Can you be honest in the most soft way possible? Oof, these are big things. Start to practice now. So that's all that piece of counseling resource and group dynamics. So let's talk about being the light in the dark and just some things that can happen when we hold a group with different spheres of consciousness. So we already talked about some of the differences between legal, regulatory, ethical, boundaries, limits, preference. These are all different train tracks of reality of our system. You need to know the legal set of state laws. So this is DORA. So next I'm going to invite you Google DORA, D-O-R-A, counseling laws. You can see that dual relationships aren't actually written into the law, but they're written into regulations. And you can see ethically we have suggestions on how to work with that. But ultimately, it's a gray area of your boundary as a human, as a lived experience agent, and how we navigate that or scuffs or challenges in group, we have to rely on all these different train tracks. So let's start off with know the law, know standard common practices within your field. So this is why you have your ACA Code of Ethic as you're developing your group, as well as your theoretical orientation. And of course, be aware of client rights and practice within your level of competency. So what we mean by this is if you've never taken a class on IFS or don't have a training in it, and then you read a book on IFS and you're like, I'm ready to go lead it. You can, but you want to make sure that you have supervision with someone who's trained in that so you can get adequate feedback. That's the fidelity piece. That's us being honest with ourselves of, am I ready to take this on, or is my ego just really excited? Some potential group issues could be the following. Skipping around topic. Sometimes one person will dominate the discussion, and so you'll have to redirect. At times you can get sidebars of conversation that can take place that distract from maybe someone sharing a really personal story about the loss of a relationship or the loss of a loved one. Some people can be really shy, and just expect that you'll get projections of anger or discomfort as the leader. You're consenting to be projected on. So it's kind of like if you've ever had a water balloon flight, this is how groups can be at times, where you're like, yes, I'm consenting for you to throw all the water balloons my way, and I'm just going to hold them with curiosity and love and redirect it to the group. That's part of facilitation, is you holding enough neutral in your system that whatever comes your way is absolutely okay. But know that these are some of the issues that you may run up against in the field. Other potential emergencies that might challenge you is someone that really contrasts your own sense of morality. People that force other people to speak, you'll have to redirect that. And also redirecting dislike of other members. So this is where you gotta ground in and set some boundaries. So we've covered a lot, and as we progress throughout the course, you'll notice the different stages of group. So Tuckman, he has a model that outlines 5 stages of group development. It's forming. So it's an initial stage where members are getting to know each other. They establish a role expectation. The next phase is storming. The storming phase can be a conflict, a disagreement. And then the norming is when this natural cohesion just arises from the field. And there are shared norms of how we work, how we hold things. And then that moves us into the last 2 phases of performing, meaning like if we're doing a group on what makes us suffer, like we're performing, we're no longer even suffering. We're just like in that liberatory place where we're vibrating, we've alchemized whatever was in the field, either through psychodrama. That can be a really lovely way to alchemize emotion. In psychodrama, we act out our suffering in the same way Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a really great model to act out the wounds so we don't have to reenact it in the rest of our life. So that would be the performing stage of a group, and then we adjourn. We disband and we go into the rest of our life. So we're in a microcosm of forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning all the time. And this is Tuckman's model for it. But know that the Buddha's thought of suffering really is that pain and suffering are 2 different things. And suffering doesn't have to be inherent. Rather, it's just a reaction. So what you may find is in groups, people get really attached to the stories around their wound instead of just dealing with the wound. So you may also have to redirect people, like you were in this hamster wheel and you can see it. And how do you redirect them to just move it out of the body? So I have here an image of a piano. And the reason why I brought in this image is because it's almost like group plays on different keys of our chakra points and brings in different observations that we didn't even know were there. And then we're becoming this group harmonic of what emerges from the group. What can we harvest together? What can we learn? So Yalom identified 11 therapeutic factors, we'll get into these more, that come up with group effectiveness. One is the installation of hope. Like if other people can overcome suffering, so can I. If the Buddha could be a liberated, blooming being, so can I. And that's hope. Another therapeutic factor that is found in this research of Yalom's is universality. There are the core wounds that we all collectively share. Maybe it's not personal. And then, of course, altruism. How kind are we? Can we see that you are me in a group, and whatever you're working out is also something that is shared in one of my 3 selves, right? Because we have at least if we take a mind map from Carl Jung, we have the self being informed by what it projects out in the world. We have the self informed by the collective unconscious. So you have your own personal collective repository of information, soul data, and you have the shared stratum. He called it a stratum of all beings that have ever lived across all times, across all nations, where we have archetypes, and those live as well. So in our 3 aspects of self, of what we get projected into the world, what we are in our sense of self, in our collective repository, and then the group collective consciousness, all of that is interacting in a group setting. That is complex stuff. That is really complex stuff. So you having the basics of what phase is a group in, are you forming? Oh, is there a storm right now? Are you performing? That's helpful to know. Knowing that you can teach to the upper levels and limits is also really important to know when we're engaged in group harmonics. So the practice I'd like to leave you with, as I'm going to call this embodied homework spelled HOME, so at your home, in yourself. And work, W-E-R-K, work is like a dance move that you really like you want to twerk and work. And when you're twerking, you're having so much fun, you don't even know it's work, like the old world, like the old word of work. None of that. We're twerking, we're working. That is the offering, embodied homework. So some of your embodied homework for today's module is starting your council. I know it's exciting. So a council helps to support us by, imagine kind of like you're the therapist, right? And you're going to be tossed into unknown energies. They'll challenge you. That is the gift. And you'll go back to a council member who inspires you. So some people on my council member include Rumi. Rumi, I talk to all the time, like, Rumi, what do you think about this situation? What do you got? I also love Ram Dass as someone on my inner council. He's one of our founders. He is a current that started Naropa that we all benefit from. On my council, I also love Archangel Michael and Kali, the Hindi goddess, right? With 8 different arms, who's scary, and on the battlefield, if you cut off a piece of her, she grows back, right? She just has a fierceness. So it's kind of like when you don't know what to do, we can have human support systems. Like maybe you give your mom a call or your best friend, or you go on a walk with your dog, and then the answers just come. We also have an internal council, but if you don't have a home in yourself, it's really hard to cultivate a council. So the practice I'm going to suggest this week for cultivating your council is set up a small sacred space in your home or your living space. I invite you to put a rock or candle there, and then spend time with one person this week on your council. So if you know how to build a relationship with an animal, or you know how to build a relationship with your younger sister, it's the same thing. You're going to spend time with this frequency. So let's say you choose Ram Dass. Let's just say he has these really great Be Here Now podcasts that you can listen to. So maybe you listen to him speak for 30 minutes this week. And then maybe you also take an hour and just talk to him and see how he responds. Can you dip into a relationship with someone that inspires you, whether they have physical form or not? This is how we cultivate a council. It's kind of a, what would Oprah do? What would Ram Dass do? What would your higher self do? The embodied homework for the council is 1. Here's the first step. Pick 3 to 5 individuals that you would like to have on your council. First step, just pick who they're going to be. 1. 2, this week, spend time dropping in to one of those members of your council, whether reading a book on that person, listening to their words, reading their poetry, getting to know them. And then 3 is going to be ask them for help, talk to them, and then just see if anything comes up. Maybe nothing, maybe it's crickets. Find someone else on your council, right? I wouldn't want someone who gives me crickets, silence, to be on my council. And then this is a way we can resource in the moment when we don't know what to do, where to go on a scenario. Snap your fingers and call in some counsel. So this is going to be one embodied way we play with resourcing, and we play with counseling in the truest sense of you having a committee of beings who are here on the planet or off the planet to support you in your awakening process of consciousness within the area of group facilitation. Happy homeworking. Happy home twerking. Okay, so here's what we covered today. We talked about opening and closing, as well as somatic and verbal consent. I also shared with you some of the tension with our textbook and some of the videos I'll show, which is it's showing you how to build a very bare bone structure to what group actually is. But you need that structure, that skeleton, and then I'm going to come in and give it more color and life and paint and color. And so how we do that is you getting familiar with your own theoretical orientation of groups. Are you decolonial in nature? Are you transpersonal? Are you somatic? That involves your own self-study of like how hands-on of a group leader you're going to be or how hands-off. You get to decide. We also talked about counselor resourcing through the practice of Tonglen. Self-care is a type of Tonglen, as well as counseling. I will put up some guided meditations for you to play this week, and I will also make a video specific to counsel development. And we also talked a little bit about looking into the shadow or the stages of group, something that can come up. People can be distracted. People may not want to talk or share. People can dominate the conversation. And how you work with that is really up to you, knowing there's not a right or wrong, but your ethical code becomes your armor of how to deal with that. So after today's Dharma talk about both group counseling, how we understand it in the modern Western world, and how we understand it on all of these transpersonal levels, I hope that you got some learnings, and I hope that you write your code of ethics on your mirror so you can see it in the morning and start to work with it. And I hope that you decide to play with some of the embodiment homework that is built into the lectures and the talks. Have a beautiful, 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 beautiful rest of your day or your evening. And I look forward to connecting with you more. And if you have any questions on chapters 1, 3, and 5, whether it's questions on the structural aspects or the transpersonal aspects, know that I'm here for both of that. Taking a bow.